and welcome again to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today, we're glad to be joined by former Assemblyman Sebastian Ridley-Thomas. Sebastian, how's it going, and what are you up to?
Well, Jarrett, thank you so much for having me, and hello to the SacTown Talks audience. Things are going well. I'm talking to you from Nevada, my new home over in the Silver State, so things are well.
Nice, nice. I guess last week we had the Democratic National Convention, and kind of you got on X and kind of raised some eyebrows. A longtime Democrat, kind of maybe not happy with the state of the Democratic Party today. Kind of, can you talk to us a little bit about the national political conversation and kind of where the Democratic Party is headed in your mind?
Well, yes, the Democratic Party seems to have left a number of people behind, and I'm one of them. One of the more disaffected, forgotten folks in terms of being a young African American man who's now involved in business and small businesses in particular. And the message seems really incongruent with what I see on the ground and what my peers who are similarly situated experience. So while there was a great deal of emphasis on joy and the Biden transition and the like, that didn't really speak to the deeper issues that I think America is feeling in the not just the DNC last week, but the Harris Walls interview, the first as a ticket just yesterday, really leave a lot to be desired in terms of policy and even politics. The optics, the coalitions don't seem to appeal to a majority of Americans, and certainly not people who are situated where I am. I'm still part of that notorious group of millennials, and there are fewer and fewer of us, particularly men, who are embracing the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. COVID kind of changed the world a bit, and kind of here in 2024, it doesn't resemble the world in early 2020 before COVID. A lot of things changed. People have moved around. Kind of now that the world's changed, what do you see some of the issues that are at the forefront, for millennials and African American men that you aren't seeing being taken care of and putting you guys in mind?
The economy, the economy, the economy. You really hit it on the head, Jared, when you talked about pre and post COVID. It's a different world. A lot of migration patterns. Many people have changed jobs, changed industries, and it better informs what they're paying attention to. And before COVID, we could say we had one experience in uh, our young adulthood as we were moving toward later adulthood. But now we can say we are adulting full time. This is the language of millennials. And there are a lot of strains on us that are pretty unique in terms of cost of living. This is an economy that is as bad as I have seen it as I recall, especially with respect to the cost of things and typical earnings. So, in places like Georgia, where I went to school, in places like the Midwest, where I have a lot of friends, and other parts of the uh, kind of middle of the country, what some people call the flyover states who are Democrats, um, it's just not making ends meet. Those issues about energy production and cost, economic opportunity, and the way that we attempt to encourage families to have a decent quality of life seem to be eroding.
Yeah. Like one thing is a big issue for me and other millennials is, you can't afford a house, right? If you bought pre 2020 and you got, a house at, 2% interest rates, you're looking great. And if you miss that window, good luck buying prices that are now double at, 6 or 7%. Probably, leaving California and going to Nevada probably played a lot of, housing costs and different things probably played a lot into that. How do you see this kind of national housing narrative affecting California, where we're trying to build houses and make it more affordable?
Well, California has a number of challenges. Uh, the national discussion is so strong, and it's forcing a lot of people out. It's forcing those who are like you and I, who see opportunity, have earning potential, have a long term view about life, but just can't square where we might live versus where we might work and where we might want to enjoy a decent and safe community. The price points in the most challenged areas are so high they're unattainable, and the supply of housing is inadequate to the need of young professionals, of families, and the like. The discussion that Democrats have about affordable housing sounds nice, but it doesn't get to the question of housing supply, of restrictive land uses, and of the capital that's required to actually construct, retrofit, and expand housing. I know there's a very hot topic with down payment assistance that was before the state Senate. So, from an African American millennial male perspective, there seems to be less and less attention on the needs that we might have as we start families, as we try to grow in our communities. And the national narrative, I haven't read the bill personally, but the national narrative is that you see a large undocumented population having access to these programs. That undermines confidence in the long term bet in California for a young uh, man, a young family who have played by the rules, who have gone to school, who are working, but just can't figure out how to put together the nugget to attain home ownership, that pathway to economic opportunity, that which separates often working from middle and upper income classes. That wealth building opportunity is nearly shut off in California. And even people, Jared, who got the 2% interest rate are in this weird trap in places like California where they can't sell. Maybe they refinance, but they can't sell because they can't find anything. Their equity is kind of trapped, and they're what is a colloquial term as referred to as interest rate prisoners. So even those who are saving a bit on the mortgage. Now let's not talk about anybody who came after,
Right.
who's now somewhere between 5 and what, 7, 8 if your credit's not great and you're begging and borrowing around the rest of your personal expenses in order to make the mortgage, your property tax, and if you're a first time home buyer who use down payment assistance, prime mortgage insurance. Those things are intense and they're spiking. And let's not talk about the difficulty in California with homeowners insurance. I think Allstate came out with some information this past week in the last few days about spiking rates. So it's a very difficult environment. And I guess the last response to that on housing is in California, there seems to be an increasing tension with building in areas that are ecologically and disaster challenged, natural disaster challenged areas where there might be fires, floods, erosion, or other difficulties. So I think California may be built out, Jared. I think that it'll be hard to see California's population, especially among young professionals like you and I, growing anytime soon.
Yeah, it's kinda like you were saying, the economy, it's bills, 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 right? All the bills are going up.
Yep.
Cost of, groceries, gasoline, insurance, it's kinda getting unbearable, and the wages aren't keeping up with it. Kinda nationally, kinda what are you seeing and hearing? And, everything in California is a lot more expensive than it is elsewhere in the country.
Yes, definitely. But there are things that are mimicking California. Their groceries are out of control, gas out of control. And it's a weird thing when we talk about 20% more than in the Biden and Harris economy rather than the Trump economy, because when you look at a good and you look at its cost, if you buy eggs, bacon, lettuce, milk, uh, basic staples for a healthy diet, and you're preparing food at home, maybe to save money, maybe to be healthy, you see such an escalation on the unit price, on the weight price, on the uh, availability of the things that are just basic goods, that it feels like it's even more for most people. That's what I observe. And because California is the breadbasket and it's a major producer of petroleum, the petroleum in California is also in Arizona and Nevada. California's oil and gas policies and energy policies directly affect most of the Western grid, especially Arizona and Nevada. And California's policies are so taxing that they are draining the energy, the enthusiasm for Democrats out of places like Arizona and Nevada. And I think it's no accident. So it's like people brag. What I recall is the Democrats used to brag about California. What happens in California transforms everything else. It leads the way for so many things. Well, right now it's leading the way in cost. It's exporting cost. Uh, Years ago, UC Berkeley and PPIC did some polling around California's climate change and their willingness to pay to mitigate climate change. And I always thought it was a very suspect poll, and there were suspect numbers in it because they thought that they saw that Californians were willing to pay more. Those two entities that did that joint polling, where Californians were willing to pay more for climate change mitigation on their typical utility bill. And in 2021 and 2022, I was very surprised that nobody brought that up when people in the PG&E territory were getting $700 and $800 gas bills in the winter, or when people in the SoCal gas territory and SDG&E were getting $400 and $500 bills when there was that warm period toward the end of August into early September in 2022, especially. So the beliefs, the ingrained ideas, and some of the policies that are moving in California are not only taxing Californians and making the Golden State less of an attractive prospect for younger families, but they're really, really upsetting the economies of their neighbors, and it's changing the political calculus in many ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've definitely seen kind of I guess, a negative turn towards California these past year or so about how, we don't want the rest of the country to turn out like California. Problems with housing, homelessness, cost of living, etc. Now that you're out of California, out of the kind of the bubble here, kind of, we don't seem to be able to come up to solutions that actually work here. What are you seeing that's working in other states that you're working in that's not, that we're not applying here?
So let me start the furthest east and work my way back quickly. In Georgia and Pennsylvania, they're very interesting states, different political structures, but their economies have some similarities. They embrace all industries. They are not critical or destructive to their main economic drivers. They don't take economic development for granted. So in Georgia, they build plants and they do agriculture and they do arts and entertainment and they do construction and infrastructure and they manage their natural resources well. In Pennsylvania, you see an expansion of foodstuffs, agribusiness, and petroleum exploration, mining, and extractive industries. They recognize that if you're going to maintain an economy in an ideal sense, and Pennsylvania learned this, I think, from generations of difficulty with the steel industry and the like, you have to keep an industry mix so that you're not too concentrated in any one area. And you want to keep those industries growing and you want to keep those groups that work there, be they unionized labor or non-unionized labor, really, really engaged in productivity and growth. That's what I observed there. In the middle of the country, places like, let's say, Texas and Michigan, even though Michigan has a Democratic governor and a Democratic state house, I think I can't remember what their state senate looks like, but there's a general democratic shift in it had been before the pandemic in the Michigan state government. They are really trying to unlock opportunity and access as much in the way of the hard manufacturing industries that they can and honoring and respecting the legacy of Detroit. And while they may talk a little bit about EV cars and things like that, what you see is a doubling down on the traditional auto industry with combustion engines. That's what Detroit is about. And it is affected by California policy. And there are going to be a lot of consequences as California continues to attempt to restrict the kind of cars that they like to produce in Detroit and the kind of jobs that those cars generate. In Texas, most people criticize Texas because, well, from a California perspective, because they think of it as a lesser quality of life. But Texas has better schools in the public sense. It has sprawling and communities, and sprawl is not a bad word in Texas. Its energy grid it does need some work because of deregulation and how it manages its growth. That's one issue that is unique. But its jobs environment and climate is remarkable. It is a magnet for investment, both in migration and e-migration, to see businesses grow. And then in Arizona and Nevada, what you really see is the primary exodus of Californians who are starting the next chapter of their lives in the rugged West that has a lot of amenities. Obviously, Nevada is a 24-hour state and has any number of industries dominated by hospitality, but a strong mining community, a lot of construction as well. Uh, they have slowly removed restrictions on growth. They are comfortable with planned communities. And a lot of California home builders are actually doing a lot of business in Nevada and Arizona. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. A big issue in California this year has been, retail theft, crime. You saw during the convention, Governor Newsom was addressing the issue and comparing, his retail crime laws to other states and saying, his punishments, aren't the reason why the state's having all these issues. Kind of, what do you see some of the answers to kind of the Prop 47 repeal, something you were here for, and kind of seeing this kind of crime wave that's taken over the state in front of mind with voters right now?
Well, there are any number of things. The first thing about that is what you acknowledge, what a lot of people seem not to wish to discuss, is the incidences of crime versus the reporting of those crimes. There is a major disconnect in terms of how people experience their communities in the retail space. And a part of the death of retail is the intensity around physically entering a place of business that sells goods and the storage of items in retail settings, pharmacies, certain clothing stores, and the like. It's underreported. The stores seem to be struggling in California and in some other places with the management of homeless people who may gather, or with organized retail theft and or independent thieving. The thing that we missed in California, I suspect, is that the pendulum swung too far on trying to reduce the incarcerated population, and it missed some of the issues that businesses, consumers, and communities deal with when they are beset by social disorder. Crime is a form of social disorder. People who are threatened in their place of work, their place of recreation, or their home need relief. And I think there's a lack of acknowledgement about that. And we may not have had the best solutions in terms of large incarceration, but we have a major problem in that space, in that small goods theft. Not just in, and when I say we, society does, not just in California, but it's
Mhm.
so acute. And Jared, you know what drives this is lack of opportunity. It's lack a stagnation of small businesses. It's an exodus of other stores in shopping centers and retail centers, so that the one big box retail store that's left is the target for everybody who has limited means. And it is, to me, a much more symptomatic of the economy. It's a statement about the economy to me. Nothing stops a bullet like a job. That's my lived experience. That's that of my peers. And that's, I believe, that of people who own businesses that are in the retail space. And when you see escalating costs at maybe a place where you may want to shop, it is enough of an incentive. There's an economic incentive to engage in activities of social disorder, which are inclusive of crime. So I think the fix, there's so many, who knows what will happen. I think that the California is not the model in terms of trying to find a solution. It's a very difficult system because of the way that Prop 47 was imposed, the repeal. I think there were maybe 10 laws. I didn't read them, but there were 10 laws that were passed in the last 2 months to try to address retail theft. I see sheriffs, and you saw them after the DNC critiquing a lot of California leaders because they're dealing with the real impacts, whether or not it's reported as a crime. They get an
Right.
incident call. They need to, I mean, you have a sheriff in Sacramento County who is doing very, very critical work to inform the public of how difficult his job is and how beset his officers are. And I think it's also a part of the reason why you see historic lows in terms of the recruitment of law enforcement officers. So no matter what anybody says, no matter what the rallies may say, no matter what the hype may say, you see when someone is beset by crime, victimized physically, when a business owner is their business is vandalized or stolen from, that they're going to first call their local law enforcement. And that relationship vis-a-vis Prop 47 and some of the interaction with the state of California seems to be very weak. Other states do it much differently. Now, other states are not as big as California, but they seem to have, even when there are differences, ideological differences, a more cooperative and collaborative relationship.
Right.
They do not view law enforcement as the enemy, business as the enemy, or their community members as the enemy, whether they are law-abiding citizens, as most people are, or those who are careerists in theft. It's just a very different approach and relationship. It's a solutions based approach. That's been my observation in various states. But California's issues with retail theft, I don't point to Prop 47. I point to overregulation, overtaxation, limitations in the diversity of business industries. Like, the California has a unique economy, but it is not growing evenly, and there's a focus on a couple of industries that do not sustain themselves long term without a complete transformation of the economy. But the more what we used to call blue collar jobs you have, the more men that are employed in those industries, the lower your crime rate. Nothing stops a bullet, crime, social disorder, challenges with families and communities like a job.
Yeah, interesting. You were chairman of the Rev and Tax Committee here. You're very familiar with California's tax system, something much bemoaned by a lot of residents, and number one issue raised when people are leaving the state. Kind of,
Yeah.
we're facing budget deficits, billions of dollars budget deficits. Kind of talk to us about kind of how you see the California tax system, and why isn't it working for us, and kind of what can we look to kind of, I guess, balance our budgets in the future and make this place a little more I guess, business friendly in the future.
Jarrett, you told me when we first met that California had a lot to do on its business environment. That was like 12 or 13 years ago. And I heard you, but I wasn't fully understanding what you said. California engages in its tax system is so difficult, especially if you are not a very large business, that it doesn't provide much incentive. Hence why you see the largest outflow of, at one point, I don't know if this is true today, but certainly earlier this year, Q1, Q2, the largest out migration of Californians were people that were your and my age who were high income.
Mhm.
Because once they think they've attained that high wage job in Silicon Valley and Silicon Beach in Southern California, in the research uh, concentration in San Diego, uh, they look at their check and they see their federal deductions, Medicare, Social Security, withholding, and then they see their state obligations. And that state obligation, in terms of the tax burden, is very, very intense. It's the margin of California's opportunity, and it's not competitive. Even as you think about government budget deficits, the deficit for the taxpayer is quality of life and opportunity. You can make six figures in most of California and have no chance of becoming a homeowner. You can be middle to high six figures, attain a property, but not be able to afford it because you cannot maintain the high income to keep up with basic mortgage payments, certainly not the shorter mortgages that are easier to get, the 15 and 12-year mortgages that you see concentrated among higher income people that live in higher cost areas. So there's a real conversation California is going to have. I don't think it's ready yet because, the state's population is still north of 38 million people. It's not quite 40 anymore. It lost, I don't know, a net loss maybe of about 1.5 million, 2 million people since the start of the pandemic. People still do move, high income, middle income, working class, and certainly the poor, uh, move to California in high rates still relative in relative numbers, but the percentages are declining. The birth rate is declining. Even the large immigrant population, foreign-born worker population, foreign-born resident population, documented and undocumented, are having to measure whether or not they really want to be in California because the cost is too intense, and that's why you see great popularity for things like removing tax on tips and Social Security income for seniors. That's why it's such a pain point, not just in places like Nevada, but the valet in outside of the kitchen or any of the nice restaurants in Sacramento when they get their Venmo, Zelle, Cash App payments, and then they get an IRS bill,
Yeah.
and then the IRS notifies the Franchise Tax Board, and the Franchise Tax Board notifies EDD, whatever marginal income that they're making, even if it is high, middle, or low, they are getting squeezed. And that's the kind of pressure that California really has to think about. The exuberance of the COVID years for California's budget, Jared, and I think you know this because we've talked tax before, and you have a very robust tax practice, as I recall.
Yeah.
That was about the IPO market. It wasn't the ARPA money. It wasn't the stimulus money from the Trump administration that juiced California's budget. It wasn't stock trading. There was IPOs from innovative businesses. That market has collapsed. In the first 2 quarters of this year, the Financial Times reported that 254 startup technology businesses went insolvent, collapsed, and closed. A disproportionate number of those businesses have operations in California. You have seen the software businesses that were driving innovation that leaders all across the state thought of as the pride of California's economy. Like statewide, most people think, okay, California, Silicon Valley investment. The businesses that were coming out of that investment in the IT, informatics, payments, software service, consumer tech, uh, real estate tech collapsed. That collapse has represented a substantial portion of the difficulty in California. I would posit that from where I sit at this point, California needs to be competitive in the reform of its tax code. It needs to lower rates. This fixation that Democrats have with taxing people who make more than $400,000 in gross income is misguided and will ultimately lead to the largest brain drain of any state. California will mirror West Virginia in proportions of young people who leave if they don't manage their tax system. Now, their local taxes, San Francisco has a millionaire's tax, a millionaire's income tax as a city and a county, but that is not competitive, and that will erode your younger, more productive workers. And remember, people, there's such wage inflation in California. We're not talking about people who necessarily have advanced graduate academic degrees. There are tradespeople who make mid six figures and work all the time. They have an incentive to move to Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, or
Mhm.
live in Washington and Oregon. And that to me, I mean, it's okay for those other states, but to me, it misses out on the California benefiting from the higher wage industries that it has. It doesn't make sense. California would have an economic renaissance, and we saw this with the Trump tax plan, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It would have an economic renaissance if it did, I think, two things: lowered personal and corporate rates coupled with the expansion of its housing capacity. That right there might be enough to offset or close to offset some of the potential losses in state revenues. It is just not a competitive place. I used the term on X, you referenced my post, about confiscatory taxation, where the tax rate is so high
Right.
that it confiscates the wealth of its citizens. I don't think California is quite there yet, but if it mirrors the Harris proposal for taxation, if California thinks that it should raise rates on what it perceives as higher income, but relative to the state is middle or upper middle income, you'll see a level of brain drain that you will be shocked by.
Yeah. A lot of Democrats are kind of upset that they didn't get to participate in a primary process, that basically Harrison Walls were ordained for them and they didn't get to pick them. And usually through a primary process, issues come to head and the voters get to choose what's important to them. Kind of why is it a shame that, the democratic process wasn't followed and a primary wasn't done, and kind of, we're left with candidates that, nobody picked except for some party officials.
Yeah, I think people hate backroom deals and in their political parties more than anything. When you have representative government, you expect compromise that may come in various forms. Some of the ideas may not be liked to come out of policy. But when you do it politically, it undermines the primary system and it killed the democracy argument for Democrats because there wasn't one vote cast. I mean, someone made the point that Suli Gabbard, if I'm pronouncing her first name correctly, got more votes to be a presidential nominee for Democrats than Kamala Harris ever did. And it's a striking point because she was the most unpopular vice president in history, not because of media smears, but because of perceptions about performance. California Democrats, as a native daughter of California, you would presume that she would have some strength with California Democrats. I think polling has consistently showed that even before Joe Biden dropped out. But a lot of Democrats' high and lofty arguments about philosophical political concepts of democratization, nearly direct democracy, and all this other stuff that is nowhere near the concern of most Americans. For most Americans, democracy, I know this isn't exactly to your point, but for most Americans, democracy is making sure that they have borders, a safe place if they travel or their children or their friends do, and that their economy functions. That's what democracy means for most people. But Democrats are making this more nuanced argument about the high and noble ideas of democracy. and missing out on the core things that people really care about is weighing in on their own party's choice. And it really undermines confidence and the exuberance of the party bosses installing Kamala Harris, though she was the vice president, but she had no political apparatus. Remember, Joe Biden took care to make sure that she had no political standing. He treated her like a step partner, not a governing partner.
Mhm.
And diminished her status, limited her role, put her on topics that were very unpopular that she had limited range on. Those things were on such magnification. That's what contributed to her unpopularity. So you tell me, Jarrett, how do you go from being a net negative 17 points on your favorability rating to being installed overnight to now becoming the most sensational thing ever? It's not real.
Well,
And I don't.
yeah, it's interesting. Like, as an insider in Democratic Party politics, it was no secret that Joe Biden was going to be replaced at some point. It was the plan all along, right? And so, kind of, there was whispers of, oh, is Governor Newsom going to take over? Who's going to take over? How did they end up choosing Kamala over some of these other, parties who were vying?
I have no knowledge of the internals of the Democratic Party. I am just a gambling man who left the Democratic Party.
Mm,
And well, really, it left me, but that's a longer discussion. The What I anticipate occurred was that Democrats were very confused about where they were going to go. The meeting with governors, if you recall, when Tim Walz, Kathy Hochul, and Wes Moore walked out to try to reassure the American public that Joe Biden was fit for office after Donald Trump destroyed Joe Biden. And Biden collapsed under the weight of the bright lights, as we might say. That did not bring much confidence, and I thought it very interesting that Governor Newsom did not give his own public appearance live on national television. That was a very watched broadcast. I don't know if
right.
you remember it because there was a lot of tension. And I don't know that we've ever seen a group of governors from one party other than the, the Nixon resignation with U.S. senators, particularly Barry Goldwater. But I don't know that we've ever seen one party's leaders that are governors show up at the White House and say, we need to do a proof of competency check.
Right.
When that unto itself, which was necessary, did not, it was an opportunity that Newsom, for whatever reason, did not seize. And I think it in some ways may have diminished the discussions about him. The primary, the mini primary, even James Clyburn said it would have been a good idea to have a some kind of straw poll among Democratic delegates, Democratic state parties, even if it were non-binding, to take a temperature test. What I think is the Democrats are afraid of what their own voters think, and that's going to be one of the things that makes it very difficult for them to be successful in November. I think that there's a great unrest among a silent majority, not just an electoral college majority, which a lot of Democrats dismiss. Oh, the electoral college is biased. It's not just that. There's a popular vote, and it's not gerrymandered congressional districts. There is a popular vote season of discontent that Democrats do not have messaging for. Most people ascribe the difficulties to Democrats, particularly Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They don't know Tim Walz. So that's really been a knock. And if you saw the interview yesterday, they didn't get to know him a lot better, other than excuses that he might make about misrepresenting his military record or the nature of his the birth of his children. It was a letter, but it means a lot. A letter means a
Right.
lot to a lot of people when you don't know someone as folksy as Tim Walz might be. It's like, Jared, this is so interesting. It's like by installing Harris and Walz, the party bosses, the party elders, the party movers and shakers, filled a projection of what they thought voters might want that was neither reflective of Democratic Party attitudes nor general election voters. It's very strange. I wouldn't, if I had any engagement and was in the senior spaces in a party, period, I would not have suggested not having a primary. You got to have participatory input among your base. And I think that you'll be surprised about how some of those older Biden voters over in Scranton, over in the many acres of land in between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, do not appreciate the way he was bounced. At one point, Joe Biden was leading with seniors. I do not believe that Harris is leading with seniors, specifically boomers and older.
Right. It's interesting. You spent a lot of time in swing states, as you kind of noted. This is an electoral college election, right? It's not a popular vote election; it's electoral college election. You see polling. It looks like it's a tight race that maybe Harris is leading a bit. But kind of, what's your sense in some of these states you're spending in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan? What is the true sense you're getting in these states?
People are really set upon by prices, and they don't talk about inflation. They talk about making ends meet on a weekly basis. They don't have the luxury of a monthly consideration. And they wonder if the current administration has any idea of the pain that they're feeling when they're talking about the bills that they passed. Because to your point earlier, they're talking about the bills that are due and how they may have used credit to pay for one thing or another, either a home equity line of credit or a a consumer loan or credit cards, and they can't even pay down those balances, let alone make future payments. That is the overwhelming concern. And as a result of that economic discontent, you see a focus on illegal immigration, massive focus, even among the Hispanic community, which is not a monolith, which I've learned and come to appreciate. The various ethnic diversity among the Hispanic, what some people would call Latino, but that's not inclusive of all people who are Spanish speakers who are from other countries or have lineage from other countries. And then I guess the last thing would be this real concern around young men that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are backing us into war. I think that many Democrats fail to remember that men between the ages of 18 and 25 are required to be registered with the Selective Service. And they are, when last I was working in Sacramento with you, 51% of men 18 to 29 were, I think actually 34, 18 to 24 were Democrats. That number is 19% now.
Wow.
They are concerned, and most are independent, some are Republican, uh, but they are very concerned that we are sleepwalking our way into World War III. That escalations in the Middle East, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and in the South China Sea will lead to a full scale war and mobilization of themselves, their friends. And that is much higher concern than I hear on any mainstream media or among the chattering class of political elites, particularly to the left. And when I say here, observe what their comments may be publicly, um, and even subtly privately. Those three things: the economy, immigration, specifically illegal immigration, and risk of war, are driving massive anxiety in swing states. And it appears that Democrats refuse to discuss it. It appears that their existing policies are wildly unpopular and that their prescriptions seem to be inflaming the irritation. When Kamala Harris came out with in North Carolina, I think 2 Fridays ago, or maybe 3 Fridays ago, with that opportunity agenda, The only thing that she discussed that people heard was raising prices and then price controls on grocery stores. And she had a difficulty pronouncing gouging. She said gauging. That has inflamed concerns for those few people who pay attention to the day-to-day outcomes of like the presidential campaign, the people who
Right.
actually see what may be said. That has inflamed anxiety in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Georgia, in North Carolina, in and you may know I spend a lot of time in South Carolina as a part of my work now, in uh, Arizona and Nevada. And it seems like they're not willing, Democrats are not willing to embrace it. Everybody thinks Pennsylvania is important for fracking. What people say when they mean fracking is they mean oil drilling in general. They don't mean a particular type of oil drilling. It's just drilling in general where fracking may be an option, but the even the discussion of it is so sensitive because truckers that drive between Pennsylvania and Michigan who take wheat and dairy and collect goods and bring them back, whether it's tart cherries, wheat, various types of dairy products, they pay attention to retail gas prices for diesel. They don't understand why Democrats are pushing a all electric fleet for their trucks. They see cost escalating. And then when they see discussions like the Biden administration entertaining a ban on gas stoves or a ban on buying new trucks and planes that are not all electric at some point in the future, they don't know the years that are bandied about. They're like, what are you all talking about? So it's interesting, Jared, for more, even some people who may vote Democratic, they may hold their nose and vote Democratic. In those swing states, they think that the Democratic Party's policies are so far afield from their current experiences that it's a wonder why it's even a competitive national party. And my guess is that the polls are not as generous as the Harris campaign might think they are, as Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries might think they are. And you're looking at, I don't know if it's a red wave, but they got serious problems. John Tester was as pro growth as a Democrat gets up in Montana. He's 8 or 9 points underwater right now. And those are the kind of things that are very weird. In the state that I'm in, there's a military of a veteran of the armed services, a guy named Sam Brown, who's running against incumbent Jackie Rosen for U.S. Senate. And there's about anywhere between a 5 to 9 point gap. Rosen is ahead. I anticipate that that race will become even as people focus more in Nevada on whether or not they were better during the Trump administration and during the Biden administration, and then Jackie Rosen, the incumbent's role in that election and the opportunity for lower gas prices by not Californianizing their energy policy, their business environment, their tax code. That's a major risk. And if you believe what you see in various publications, it may be a reason why people in California have not been featured as prominently in the national campaign because the ideas that come out of California are so intensely anti-economic.
Mhm.
They're trying to change patterns of behavior to fit a goal. It's like a state planned economy. That doesn't appeal to the states that are going to determine the presidency, the majority in the Senate, and the competitive nature of the House.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be an interesting 2 months, these next couple months. See what happens in November. Thank you so much for joining us, SRT, sharing your opinions and your views at what you're seeing out there on the streets in other states. Always fascinating, and looking forward to catching up with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Post-election wrap. We'll see how it goes.
I would be love to do it, and it's good to be with you in the SacTown Talks community.
All right. Thank you, SRT. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.